I know what financial suffocation feels like. I do not mean the fashionable kind of stress that successful people like to talk about over dinner. I mean the kind that wakes a person up at 3 in the morning and leaves him staring into the dark, trying to calculate whether the checking account is negative $40 or negative $400, and hoping the number is closer to the first one. I mean the kind where every unknown phone call makes the stomach tighten. I mean the kind where a person does not want to open the mailbox because paper has started arriving that feels heavier than paper should feel. I mean the kind where the math of life has turned against you so completely that even small errands begin to feel humiliating. I have spent most of my life around capital, enterprise, opportunity, markets, and human behavior. And one thing I learned early is that the worst financial collapse does not begin in the bank account. It begins in the mind. It begins when shame becomes stronger than arithmetic. It begins when a person starts treating debt as proof that he is broken, rather than proof that his system is broken. That distinction matters, because a broken soul is very hard to rescue. A broken system can be rebuilt. A person who is buried in debt usually believes two false things at the same time. The first false thing is that the whole situation is his moral failure. The second false thing is that some dramatic miracle will eventually save him. Both ideas are poison. The first idea makes him weak. The second idea makes him passive. And weakness plus passivity is exactly how a person stays trapped year after year. I want to say something plainly at the start. If your finances are a mess, you have almost certainly made mistakes. I am not going to insult you by pretending otherwise, but I am also not going to insult you by pretending the modern consumer system is innocent. It is not. It spends billions teaching ordinary people to confuse access with wealth, monthly payments with affordability, and visible consumption with progress. It gives people credit before it gives them judgment. It teaches them to fear looking poor more than actually becoming poor. It tells them they deserve everything immediately, and then charges them interest for the privilege of believing it. That machine has done a great deal of damage. Still, understanding the machine is not the same thing as escaping it. You can blame the trap all day and still die inside it. So the first useful sentence is this: your condition may not be fully your fault, but your rescue is fully your responsibility. That is a hard sentence. It is also the sentence that begins recovery. When a person is broke, deeply in debt, or financially cornered, the mind loves fantasy. It wants a heroic trade. It wants a lucky break. It wants a secret investment. It wants one explosive move big enough to erase years of bad arithmetic in a weekend. That is the sort of thinking that keeps poor people permanently serving rich people. You do not speculate your way out of a fire while gasoline is still pouring across the floor. You stop the fire first before you try to build wealth. You have to stop the financial bleeding. This is where most people fail because they refuse the first honest step. They will talk about side hustles. They will talk about crypto. They will talk about the stock market. They will talk about the economy. They will talk about politicians. But they will not sit down at a table and write the exact number they owe. That is avoidance. And avoidance is one of the most expensive habits in finance. The unknown monster always feels larger than the known one. So if I were sitting across from a person whose life had become a numerical ambush, I would not begin by motivating him. I would begin by confronting him. Tonight I would say, you are going to open everything, every account, every statement, every loan balance, every credit card, every overdue bill, every personal debt you have avoided naming, honestly, even in your own head. You are going to write it all down. Not because numbers are kind, because numbers are real. And until a person stops hiding from the numbers, he remains a hostage to them. There is something that happens the first time you write the full debt total on paper. It is ugly, it is nauseating, it is humbling. And then, strangely, it is clarifying because now the enemy has a face. It is no longer a fog. It is a figure. A figure can be attacked. A fog only suffocates. This is why I do not fear zero the way most people do. A lot of people think zero is tragedy. For the person buried in negative territory, zero is liberation. Zero means the interest has stopped biting. Zero means the debt collectors are no longer eating your future. Zero means you have made it back to the true starting line. People who have never been badly underwater do not understand how beautiful zero can feel. They think it sounds ordinary. It is not ordinary. It is oxygen. But before you reach zero, you must become brutal. That is the stage people resist because it offends the version of themselves. When finances are broken, vanity has to be evicted. I call this the end of the ego tax. The ego tax is the money people pay to preserve an image that their balance sheet cannot support. It is one of the great destroyers of the middle and working classes, a financed car that exists to signal progress, a phone upgrade that exists to preserve status, dining, subscriptions, deliveries, wardrobe spending, small conveniences, and all the little cosmetic expenses that allow a person to feel above his actual condition. Ego tax is especially dangerous because it rarely feels like luxury. It feels like normal life. That is why it survives so long. Most people do not realize how much of their monthly stress is attached to maintaining a version of themselves they cannot afford. The car payment is not transportation. It is image financing. The expensive apartment is not shelter. It is identity rent. The endless convenience spending is not nourishment. It is emotional anesthesia. Once you see that clearly, you can start cutting correctly. And I do mean cutting, not trimming, not optimizing. Cutting, if your financial life is in emergency condition, then your lifestyle must enter emergency condition too. That means subscriptions go, restaurant spending goes, impulse spending goes, convenience spending goes, status purchases go. Anything purchased mainly to create the appearance of normality while your financial structure is collapsing has to be treated as hostile. This is the stage where people accuse discipline of being extreme. Let them, the people calling you extreme, are often trapped in the same arithmetic and protecting the same illusions. I have noticed something over many years. A person trying to get sober financially often disturbs the people around him because his discipline acts like a mirror. When he says no, they hear a judgment on their own. Yes, that is not your problem. If your house is on fire, you do not continue decorating the living room because the neighbors would find the hose dramatic. You put the fire out. A person in debt should think the same way. During that stage, transportation should become practical, not performative. Food should become fuel, not entertainment. Housing should become shelter, not social theater. Pride has to become quieter than arithmetic. This is difficult because modern life trains people to believe deprivation is the worst thing that can happen to them. Prolonged financial fragility is much worse than a temporary season of visible restraint. You can survive simple living. You can survive social discomfort. You can survive people thinking you have become boring. What is much harder to survive is the constant erosion of dignity that comes from knowing every month begins already behind. Once the bleed is slowed, the next phase begins. And this is where most people misunderstand capital. They think that because the bank account is empty, they have no capital left. That is usually false. They still possess time. They still possess attention. They still possess the ability to improve how valuable they are in the marketplace. In the beginning, those may be the only meaningful assets left. That is enough. I have always believed that people misunderstand wealth because they define capital too narrowly. Money is one form of stored effort. Skill is another. Reputation is another. Discipline is another. Focus is another. When financial capital is gone, the temptation is to surrender psychologically and declare the game over. But if time remains, then capital remains. The question becomes whether you will continue spending that capital like a fool. Look at the evenings of a financially desperate person. This is where the future often gets decided. He comes home exhausted. He is discouraged. He wants relief. That desire is natural. But what most people call relief is just a very expensive surrender of their remaining leverage. They scroll, they stream, they consume, they gossip. They stare at other people's lives until their own life feels even more hopeless. Then they do it again the next night. And again, that is not rest. That is liquidation of future opportunity. When a person has no money, the evening is not free. The evening is inventory. The evening is the one part of the day that can still be converted into leverage. That is why I care so much about protecting a block of focused time. Not because productivity sounds noble, because time has to be turned into something that the market values more highly than your current labor. If your current job can replace you quickly, then more hours at the same low leverage position may help survival. But they do not solve the structural problem. Eventually, the person must become less replaceable. That happens through skill, not general vague ambition. Specific economically useful skill. The labor market is not sentimental. It does not pay according to effort, character, need, or exhaustion. It pays according to scarcity, usefulness, and how expensive it would be to find somebody else who can solve the same problem. That is the cold truth. If the market can replace you in a weekend, then you will never negotiate from strength. You may be admirable, you may be hardworking, you may be decent. The market does not price decency by itself. So the escape path from zero begins with a decision: protect a block of evening hours and convert them into skill. This does not require a romantic transformation. It requires a schedule. A person who is serious about rebuilding has to stop donating all of his remaining mental energy to distraction platforms that monetize weakness. He has to close the door, silence the phone, stop checking for little chemical hits of entertainment. Sit down and study something the market actually pays for. Not randomly, deliberately, not 5 things. 1 thing. This is where many people become foolish again. They think the goal is to become broadly knowledgeable. It is not. The goal is to become economically useful in a way that can be sold. A narrow skill with monetizable demand is far more valuable at this stage than a wide cloud of interesting but unmonetized information. A person can learn copywriting, coding, video, sales, bookkeeping, automation, data work, a specialized trade, a technical service, a systems skill. The point is not which path flatters the ego. The point is which path creates leverage. During the first months, this may produce no visible financial result at all. That discourages people. They study in the dark. Their life still looks small. The account still looks weak. Friends are still spending. Nothing glamorous is happening. Good. That is what early rebuilding is supposed to feel like. The beginning of an escape does not look like escape. It looks like discipline without applause. That is exactly why most people quit too soon. They mistake the absence of visible reward for evidence that the process is not working. That is childish thinking. The most important compounding often begins invisibly. Your market value changes before your bank balance does. Your ability improves before your circumstances show it. Your confidence sharpens before your income reflects it. Invisible improvement is still improvement. Stay with it. I want to say something about education that many people need to hear. The modern world has done a brilliant job convincing the average person that useful skill must come packaged in expensive credentials, heavy debt, and long institutional timelines. Sometimes formal education is worth it. Sometimes it is not. But a financially cornered person often does not need prestige first. He needs leverage first. That means he should look for skills that can be learned intensively, proved through output, and sold through usefulness without waiting years for permission from a gatekeeper. The internet is full of noise. It is also full of usable knowledge. The difference between the trapped and the rising person is not access. It is seriousness. One person uses the internet to avoid life. Another uses it to reprice his. That difference compounds. Now let us say you protect your hours, learn something valuable, and start producing income beyond your base paycheck. This is the moment where a second trap appears. Most people think the hardest money is the first million. I disagree. For many ordinary people, the hardest money is the first real $1,000 earned through leverage rather than wages. Why? Because that money proves a dangerous thing. It proves that a new identity is possible. And the moment that proof appears, the old identity comes back to claim a reward. This is where lifestyle creep begins its seduction. A person finally earns something from skill, freelancing, selling, consulting, producing, repairing, or solving, he sees the money hit the account. Then a voice inside him whispers that he deserves to celebrate. He deserves a better phone, a better meal, a better wardrobe, a better apartment, a better version of the story he tells the world. If he obeys that voice too early, he kills the machine before it matures. The first capital is not for celebration, it is for reinforcement. That is one of the hardest lessons in wealth building. When the first new money arrives, you are not rich, you are validated. Those are not the same thing. Validation should lead to repetition, not consumption. The first $1,000 should buy software, better tools, more learning, more distribution, more reach, more capacity, or more time to deepen the leverage that produced it. It should not buy symbolic relief. Symbolic relief is how people stay on the treadmill forever. If you live like a newly rich person, the moment the first new money arrives, you will remain economically fragile with nicer packaging. I would rather see a person earn the first 1,000 and behave as if he earned nothing. That sounds harsh. It is actually compassionate. The snowball is vulnerable when it is still small. Protect it. Do not display it. Do not honor it with lifestyle. Honor it with reinvestment. The public admires finished success and almost always misunderstands how monastic the early phase really was. People see the later house, later business, later portfolio, later freedom. They do not see the ugly hidden years when the builder kept eating cheaply, driving old cars, learning late, saying no, and treating early capital like seed rather than like fruit. That hidden behavior is what matters. A lot of people want to know when life can become easier. It becomes easier when the structure is strong enough that your money and your skills start carrying more of the load than your raw daily effort. That is the real turning point. Not the day you feel fancy, the day your systems begin answering back. Until then, keep the pressure on. One danger I see again and again is that people who came from financial chaos often remain psychologically vulnerable to two opposite errors. The first error is relapse into consumer behavior, the moment income improves. The second error is permanent scarcity thinking that makes them too frightened to ever deploy capital productively. Both can hurt you. You do not want to become the person who earns more and instantly spends more. You also do not want to become the person who can never invest, can never expand, and can never put resources into growth because fear still dominates every decision. The answer is not mood, it is allocation. Some money is for stabilization. Some is for debt destruction. Some is for reinvestment. Some eventually becomes long-term ownership. If you can separate those jobs cleanly, then emotion loses a great deal of its power. I have always preferred systems that reduce the number of moral battles a person has to fight with himself, because most people are not destroyed by one dramatic vice. They are worn down by 1,000 ordinary weak moments. Good structure removes many of those moments from the battlefield. That is why I would automate as much as possible as soon as income stabilizes. Debt paydown should not depend on whether you felt disciplined after lunch. Reserve building should not depend on whether you felt inspired at 8 at night. Investment contributions should not depend on whether the headline scared you that morning. The system should move first. Your emotions can arrive later and find that the work has already begun. That is one of the greatest advantages ordinary people can create for themselves. When people hear a story like this, they often think it is only for someone in terrible financial shape. It is not. The same principles govern almost every stage of wealth building. Face numbers honestly. Strip out ego tax, protect time, increase value, monetize useful skill, reinvest early capital, automate structure, refuse lifestyle inflation until assets are truly carrying weight. That is the path from negative to zero. It is also the path from zero to strength. I want to speak now to the psychological part one more time, because that is where the real contest lives. A person who starts from zero or below has one advantage that a comfortable but thoughtless person does not have. Pain can clarify. Pain strips away illusions if you let it. A person who has truly stared into an empty account and felt the pressure of consequences can become far more dangerous in the best sense of the word than someone who inherited comfort and never learn to build. The person who built from nothing knows the machine. He knows how to survive without appearances. He knows how to delay reward. He knows how to separate wants from threats. He knows how to create value out of silence and repetition. That knowledge is powerful. Money can be taken. Skill is harder to confiscate. A person who has built himself into someone valuable can rebuild much faster than someone who merely inherited favorable conditions. That is why I am never overly impressed by surface wealth without evidence of character. Character matters. When all the financial cosmetics are stripped away, what remains? Can you sit with discomfort without anesthetizing it through spending? Can you tell the truth about the numbers? Can you live temporarily below your image? Can you study when nobody is praising you? Can you keep going when the visible reward is still small? Can you protect early capital from your own desire to look healed before you are strong? Those are the real wealth questions. A lot of people want a more comforting speech. They want to hear that they are one lucky step away. They want to hear that the right trade, trend, or tip can shortcut the work. That sort of talk is a narcotic. I am not interested in narcotics. I am interested in survival and then strength. The route is less glamorous and much more reliable. Stop the bleed, face the numbers, cut the ego tax, protect your evenings, build one valuable skill, use that skill to generate first capital. Reinvest the first capital live simply longer than your ego likes. Then let structure and compounding take over. This is what I would tell someone sitting at a kitchen table with debt papers spread out in front of him, feeling ashamed, exhausted, and late. You are not late. You are simply at the ugly beginning. Do not confuse ugly beginning with impossible future. Those are different things. The ugly beginning is where most worthwhile rebuilding starts. It is where vanity dies. It is where excuses stop paying rent. It is where the numbers finally become real enough to organize action. There is dignity in that stage if you behave correctly inside it. And there is something else worth remembering. The system profits when you remain disorganized. It profits when you stay emotionally reactive. It profits when you consume for identity. It profits when you borrow to imitate. It profits when you stay too distracted to build leverage. The simplest rebellion is not anger. It is competence. Become harder to manipulate. Become harder to sell to. Become harder to trap. Become the person who can live below appearances, learn in private, create value, and keep the first dollars working instead of displaying them. That is how the escape begins. Not with drama, with repeated refusal to stay weak. The public sees wealth as an event. Usually it is a sequence, and the sequence begins with one decision made honestly. I will stop hiding from my own math after that. Almost everything improves, not instantly, not painlessly, but truthfully. And truth is a much better builder than hope. If I had to reduce the whole lesson to one line, it would be this. Debt is not defeated by motivation. It is defeated by arithmetic, structure, and behavior repeated long enough to change your identity. That is the real opportunity hidden inside zero. Zero is the place where the story finally becomes yours. Once you understand that, you stop begging life to become easier before you change. You start changing so life eventually has fewer ways to corner you. That is the only sort of freedom I have ever trusted. Earned freedom, built freedom, quiet freedom, the kind that does not need to be announced because it has been constructed correctly. That is what waits on the other side of brutal honesty. Not magic, not applause, a stronger life. And for the person who is willing to do the ugly work from the bottom, a stronger life is more than enough.